You're watching President Trump meeting with Salvadoran President Nayib Bukele in the Oval Office. I think you'll agree, a fairly freewheeling conversation there, talking about the war in Ukraine, among other things, tariffs. He was talking about common sense policies around women in sports. But the focus was on El Salvador and its partnership with the United States. El Salvador has turned itself into one of the safest countries in the world through a controversial crackdown that put thousands of suspected gang members behind bars without legal proceedings. Now, he's become a key ally of the Trump administration as it has deported hundreds of people to El Salvador's Secot prison. President Bukele was asked about the case of the Maryland man mistakenly deported to El Salvador, and he says he won't return him as the Supreme Court ordered. So let's bring in White House correspondent Karen Travers for more on this, with senior reporter Catherine Faulders as well, and ABC's Matt Rivers, who's here in the studio. Matt has been in El Salvador recently. Catherine, I want to talk more about the case of Kilmar Abrego Garcia, the Maryland father and alleged gang member deported in error to that Salvadorian prison. President Trump says the Supreme Court ruled 9-0 in his favor. But the Supreme Court ruled Abrego Garcia should be returned to the United States. We heard there in that conversation, though, both men don't think that's going to happen.
No, and what Trump and the administration is saying here, it should be pointed out that, yes, the Supreme Court did rule 9-0, but what the Supreme Court said is that the Trump administration must facilitate the return of Abrego Garcia after he was mistakenly sent to El Salvador, a mistake, by the way, that the U.S. government has admitted that they made. This wasn't just one person who Stephen Miller, for example, would say went rogue. There have been multiple administration officials that have said in court papers he was mistakenly sent there. Now, the Supreme Court did send the case back to the lower court to determine, quote unquote, what deference Trump is owed related to foreign relations and that type of diplomacy. That is what the administration is latching onto here when they say that they won 9-0. But they certainly didn't in the true sense of what exactly this is. So because of that portion of the Supreme Court ruling, the administration is essentially saying that they don't view the Supreme Court as saying that they need to engage in any diplomacy with El Salvador in order to facilitate Abrego Garcia's release back to the United States. Now, the president of El Salvador was asked this question in the Oval Office, too, and he essentially brushed off the question. He said that it was a preposterous question and that he didn't have any plans to facilitate his return back to the United States either. So where does this all stand? Obviously, his future is uncertain in terms of what type of negotiations there are and whether or not the administration believes he should come back. Clearly, Trump and his top aides don't. But the Department of Justice is required every single day to provide the district court judge with updates about Abrego Garcia's whereabouts, his well-being, and what exactly they are doing to facilitate his return back to the United States and, frankly, comply with the Supreme Court's order. There will be a hearing tomorrow in the district court where I'm sure much of this will be addressed, but it does set up potentially what could be viewed as the administration potentially defying an order from the Supreme Court, given they don't believe that the Supreme Court is saying that the administration needs to facilitate his return when they very clearly did say that in their order last week.
Yeah, this certainly is not over for the moment. Thank you. Matt, what did you make of that meeting? It was fascinating, wasn't it? I mean, this will be the first time, I think, for many people watching, many Americans that will have seen the president of El Salvador. He cuts quite a figure, doesn't he? And you could see the two men agreed on so much.
And he's a very popular figure in El Salvador because of these policies that he carried out. Controversial, yes. Effective, also, yes. It went from one of the most dangerous countries in the world to, you could argue, is one of the safest countries in the world, at least by the crime stats. And that's something that Donald Trump absolutely loves. And frankly, it's an easy play in the public because you heard Bukele said it. He puts the rights of citizens ahead of criminals. You know, you can talk about due process, but you can't really worry about due process if you're in El Salvador when you're worried about extortion, you're worried about murder, your kids can't go to school, you can't go out after 6 p.m. So they know that, and it's an easy sell to the public. The other thing I took away from that meeting really between the two men is that Bukele wants to position himself as a Trump ally because he wants things from Donald Trump. It's a relatively small country. The U.S. is its biggest trading partner, no question about it. And so he's clearly trying to get certain not concessions, but certain things from the United States. And by, sitting next to Trump, being very offering him a lot of praise, he might get that in return.
There's a sense there that, I mean, he might even agree, Donald Trump, to start building prisons in El Salvador.
I mean, there's the realm of possibilities is immense here, because you have the United States with an administration who is willing to do things that a lot of administrations wouldn't, even some would say extrajudicial, and in El Salvador, he has a very willing partner.
Yeah, that's a relationship I think we're going to watch and watch. Karen, President Trump also addressed his tariff policy and the war in Ukraine. I mean, one thing stood out to me there. Yet again, we had Donald Trump laying the blame for the war on President Zelensky, saying they should never have started it. That is factually untrue. President Zelensky did not start the war. Russia invaded. What else stood out to you from the meeting?
I think exactly that was a big headline there. You know, yesterday, James, when the president was asked about Russia's attack on Ukraine over the weekend, he said it was a mistake. He said that a couple of times yesterday to reporters on Air Force One. Today, though, he explained that it wasn't Russia he was indicating made the mistake, but that it was a mistake for the war to start, and he blamed President Zelensky of Ukraine and blamed former President Biden. He was asked about Zelensky looking to purchase Patriot missiles, and the president said Zelensky is always looking to buy new missiles, and said when you start a war, you should know you can finish it. So again, to your point there, the president once again blaming Zelensky for starting the war in Russia, factually incorrect, and then not knowing how to end it. But notable again that he walked back his comments from yesterday about Russia making a mistake. He said today it's not Russia, it was Zelensky and Biden for starting this. Also on the tariffs, I think it was notable that we didn't hear any more details from the president, who promised that he would give details today on what the latest tariffs on semiconductors would be. He also said maybe they would be coming later this week. His administration says they'll have that in place in about a month or two. But the president, James, said that he is not changing his mind. He says he's very flexible, but that doesn't mean he's changing his position on this. He also said he doesn't want to hurt anyone, even though he's acknowledged transition costs for Americans and businesses, but said ultimately this will be the good thing for the economy in the long run.
Karen Travers, Catherine Falders and Matt Rivers, thank you. We'll have much more on this conversation in just a moment. Stay with us.